Hello, this is wmpyr. Here to talk about what I believe is an innovative way of training. I think this is relatively new in concept, maybe. That doesn't mean that I am the inventor. I believe there's probably plenty of other people already doing this, but it's something that I would like to share, and I think it would definitely um, help a lot of people get to the next level. The perspective is definitely unique in a sense because the main idea is no matter what style that you're training in, is to get all the techniques that you're learning and to divide them up into two categories. Either it's the first category is direct application, and then the second category is indirect application. And so let me quickly try to define what each one is. So direct application is stuff that's pretty easy to figure out how you're going to actually use it in a real life situation, like a combat situation, in a real fight or in self-defense situation. How are you going to use this? So if it's like a jab, a punch, it's fairly direct. You're going to punch the person in the face. It's fairly straightforward, not difficult to figure that out. So the jab is something that I would call as a direct application technique. Now, within the punches, you'll have something like maybe the hook punch or uppercut punch. That is a little bit. It's still. I would still put it in the category of direct application technique, but it's a little bit less direct than the jab, because it takes a little bit more thought for the practitioner, for the person to figure out when it comes into play. It's not fairly straightforward. So the jab, you're in a situation and the other guy's right there, and you go boom, boom, you start throwing the jab. That's fairly easy to figure out and fairly easy to utilize. And you also know that you want to use it with speed, and it's designed to set up your cross. So the cross has more power. The jab is faster, but it's not as powerful. So you use the jab, and when you see an opening, you throw the cross. So they work together, pretty simple. So where does the hook or the uppercut fit into that? And to figure that out, it takes a little bit more thinking. It's not as straightforward. Um, Maybe you go, okay, so I throw a jab and they block it like this, so then I come around the side and here's my hook. Maybe that's how you do it. There's more to it than that, and to figure out those other ways, it takes more thought, more practice, more strategy, more knowledge. So that's why I say the hook is not as direct application as the jab. The jab is a lot more straightforward. So that's a quick example. However, in the world of martial arts, there are things that are a lot more indirect application, things that are a lot less obvious on how to use it. And in fact, things that might be so subtle that maybe it's not really a technique. Maybe it's something that we call an attribute. So, for example, in Wing Chun, Kung Fu, they do something called sticky hands, which is an exercise. It is a drill to develop sensitivity skills. Sensitivity skills is an attribute, it's not a technique. How do you use that in a fight? A lot of people don't know how to do that. So they just look at it and they go, well, I don't see boxers and MMA people use that, therefore it must not work. It's bullcrap. So if that's the way you're thinking, you don't understand it and you're totally missing out. So in order to avoid that, if you understand, instead of just saying it doesn't work, you go, you know what, this does work. It's just that the way that it works is it's one of those called indirect application. So it's a lot harder to figure out, or it's a lot less subtle how it benefits you. Therefore, it's in the category of indirect application, and you don't dismiss it as it doesn't work. You still understand that this can help you, and you still train in it, and you do your best to benefit from it. So as long as you keep that in mind and you put it in the category of indirect application, you'll be fine. And you go, maybe that's long-term training, and it might take a while until I start getting it, but you keep practicing it. It may not be your focus, but you keep practicing it. So that's the proper attitude, I believe. And because if you dismiss it, you're definitely not going to benefit from it. You closed yourself from it. But if you put it in that category, then you still have room and opportunity to benefit from it. Now, on the flip side of things, there are people that train in Chisao, which is sticky hands. They train in that, but they think and they confuse it with direct application. So they think that the way they're training with their partner, that's the way they're going to use it in an actual real life situation. And so they've confused an indirect application technique with a direct application technique. And therefore, that's why we see those guys that challenge MMA fighters and get destroyed. That's what happens because they misunderstood the technique. So to avoid misunderstanding the technique, if you would look at your whatever style it is that you practice, look at it and label everything there into direct application and indirect application. Some are more, some are less. More towards direct application, and some still may be direct application, but less so. Or some are 100% in the category of indirect application, and some are, it's still indirect application, but it's less in that, less so. Still, like for example, jump roping. Jump roping is not how you fight, but you can see that the benefit that you get from jump roping, it's going to help your cardio, it's going to help with your footwork, even though that's not the actual footwork you will be using. It can benefit your footwork, and it can benefit your timing, it can benefit your reflexes. So, and maybe for some people that's easier to understand, that jump roping is not an actual fight. You don't fight that way, but training in it that way will help you. Well, that's definitely what I would call an indirect application technique. It gives you attributes once again. It's the same with Tai Chi, with the rooting, where they work on their posture and they work on sinking their chi, or whatever you want to call it, and rooting themselves in. This is working on having a good base, good balance. That is indirect application. It can definitely help you for grappling. It can definitely help you for even striking, because if you're going to hit something hard, you need to have a good solid base to launch your attack from. Imagine a catapult where the base was weak. The moment it catapulted something, it would flip over and it can't launch another attack. It's done. So it's important to have a good base. So that's the message there. So yeah, that perspective of dividing every single technique that you do. I don't care what style it is. I don't care if you do a sports style, you do a traditional style, or you do a very modern tactical style. It doesn't matter. you're gonna have techniques that belong in both of those categories. Even the MMA guys, there's stuff that you guys do in there that we can call indirect application, and it's very important to realize that. And I see people like there was one where Ronda Rousey was training, and she's on the mat and she's like wiggling, looking like a baby that's wiggling on a mat or something, but she's just kind of like worming through. That's indirect application. That's going to help her with a lot of things on the ground. At the very least, mobility on the ground, which is if you ever go up against another grappler and the person, if you're in a scramble, the person who has better mobility skills is going to come out on top there in a scramble. So that's very important. And doing stuff like that will help you. So she's using her arm and her legs to attack you while she's using her back and her hips to move on the ground to get a better angle for the submission. So you can see that that could totally help her out. It's things like that. If you've trained in BJJ, you may have heard of Gymnastica Natural. That is 100% indirect application. All of those animal type movements will help you in your Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu stuff, all the other stuff that you do. Those aren't necessarily combat techniques, but they will help your combat techniques. And that's another way that I view Sistema. Sistema is one of those styles that just about everything they do in that style is what I call indirect application, once again. But if you also train in a style like Sambo, you combine the two together, then it'll make you the best that you can be. Because if you only did Sambo is a sports style, and that's for fighters, and you can only get so far. Again, amongst other fighters, you can only get so far training that way. So when you want to get, how can you maximize your potential, then you look towards something like Sistema, and they will improve your body mechanics. They will improve the little things. And to me, this is another thing that, for example, another example from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, one of the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guys ever is Rickson Gracie. And one of the recent things that he's been talking about is his brand, his style of Jiu-Jitsu, is he calls it invisible Jiu-Jitsu. And I believe that what he means by invisible Jiu-Jitsu is exactly the same thing that I'm talking about here, is the indirect application stuff, the stuff that you really can't see, the stuff that it's like how you apply that in actual combat. It's not intuitive, it's not direct, it's not like, oh, it's obvious, I know how to do that, I know how to use that for combat. It's the stuff that you can't see. That's what he's talking about. And for example, and one of the things that I noticed is like there was one fight I saw where he was mounted on the guy dropping punches and the other guy bridged. And normally in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you bridge when the guy is mounted on top of you. You make them lose their balance. They punch the floor instead of punching you because you made a miss. And then you trap their arm, and then you bridge and roll. You do the escape from the mount. When Rickson Gracie was mounted, the other guy bridged. His balance was so good that it just lifted him up, and he just kept punching back down. It really didn't faze him at all. That's invisible jiu-jitsu, or at least that's the start of it, in my opinion, is being connected to your opponent and have such good body mechanics that you don't lose your base that easily. You don't lose your balance that easily. That's invisible jiu-jitsu. That's what kind of stuff can you do to train that? That's the indirect techniques. That will take your direct application techniques, the combat techniques, to a higher potential, in my opinion. So that's why it's important to do both, and it's also very important not to confuse the two. So I hope this video makes sense. It's the things that the Morihei Ueshiba, the founder of Aikido, the things that he has been teaching and working on, like leading your opponent, those are all concepts and principles. The technique itself is just an example. The technique is, to me, just a drill to help you understand and to be able to make those principles happen. But it's not that you do those techniques in a street situation and then try to do what he did. That's not the way that it works. First, you have to understand what those principles are, and then you got to find a way to mix that with your combat techniques to use it in an actual real life situation. Those techniques that he personally chose are specifically designed to help you understand the principle quicker. So it's not that those techniques are there for actual combat, it's to help you understand the principles. So it's the same as the sticky hands in Wing Chun, or it's the same as push hands in Tai Chi. The Aikido Randori is no different. They're just doing it with the entire body. It's a very specific game that they're doing to develop the attribute, to develop the desired skill, which, once again, I put in the category of indirect application. So, anyway, I hope that makes sense. Thank you for watching, and take care, folks.